Hello and welcome to Great Britain in Focus. I'm James McCullough.
And I'm Pascal Mary Rakovich.
Recently, Russ Fairman sailed out of Southampton with a small crew on a 10-week pilgrimage, marking 100 years of the charity Stella Maris. This small boat is sailing right around the British Isles, enveloping it with prayer.
Russ and his crew are stopping at over 50 ports and shrines, and they made their pilgrimage to Walsingham, walking 10 miles to get here. Fortunately for us, a storm picked up and they were stranded here an extra day, so we got to go and meet them and learn more about this inspiring adventure and mission. Hello and welcome to EWTN Great Britain. I'm Pascal Mary Rakovich, and today we are not in our studios in Walsingham. We are a few miles north on the coast, Wales next to the sea, with Russ Fairman, who's on a very special mission, sailing around the British Isles. So we are on his boat. Russ, tell us what's going on.
Well, we're a week in. We're in Wales next to the sea, which is a tiny little place, as you know. And we crawled into here under cover of darkness, assisted by the harbour master, with a crew of pilgrims. And so we're safely tied up here now. And this is Wales next to the sea. And our next port of call is going to be Grimsby. But this is a journey that started in Southampton on the 29th of April, and it'll take us 2.5 months, 10 weeks, and we'll travel around the whole of the British Isles, and we'll come through the Pentland Firth, up underneath the Orkneys, then travel to the Western Isles, the Outer Hebrides, and then we'll swing underneath the Isle of Skye and come back into Glasgow. And then from Glasgow we'll travel to Northern Ireland and then down the coast. So we'll visit probably 60 different places, and this is all in aid of Stella Maris, actually. And can I tell you a little more about Stella Maris?
Yes, tell us about Stella Maris.
Well, many people know that. So it's actually is a real charity steeped in history, especially in the Catholic Church. And it started in Glasgow in the 1920s. So 100 years since that time, they've now established a team of chaplains in the UK, but across the whole of the world, and they're doing upward of 70,000 ship visits a year in the support of welfare for fishers and seafarers, which is quite stunning. And the work they do is a beautiful outreach to some of these guys that are at sea for 9 months at a time, no access to what we take for granted in terms of services and communion. So I've been a supporter with my wife Deirdre for decades. Our little parish has collected for them, etc. And I do know them well. But I was approached by a friend of mine called Nick and Neil, who is a senior chaplain, and said we'd like to celebrate this 100 years of Stella Maris with something that gives us a fellowship, something that creates a sense of belonging to the one organisation. And of course they're established in their teams all around the British Isles and elsewhere, of course, but they wanted to do something that was nautically based, and I've done something like this before, sailing around Britain for a charity. So they approached me, and my wife Deirdre gave me a pass to leave the home for another 2.5 months. Permission. Yeah, so we pulled together a plan back 2 or 3 years ago, when it was on the actual anniversary, but with COVID, of course, we had to postpone it. So this has been a voyage in planning for nearly 3 years, and it's finally come together. So we're underway.
So this is really celebrating about 100 years of this charity, Stella Maris, which used to be called Apostleship of the Sea.
You took the very words out of my mouth.
That's right. And it's and it wants to help fishermen and people who are out at sea, stranded, very vulnerable, and make sure that when they arrive back, because some of them are away from their families for months at a time, is that right, 9 months or 12 months?
Yes, but the foreign workers. So the industry is made up with seafarers that come from all over the world. A strong contingent from those would be the Philippines, which is a very Catholic country.
Yes.
And as you know, there's a desire for communion, and they have that desire, and they just don't get access to that. So they're supported in that endeavour. But the work they do actually is quite beautiful. It's quite gentle. So they'll go onto a ship, they'll bring gifts.
These are the volunteers that work for Stella Maris.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the crew know they're coming. They can see the little shopping bags with the Stella Maris gifts within them. People, supporters, make little woolly hats and things. But those gifts, as trivial as they sound, they're an act of love, and they precede, really, the real gift, which is that that gift of prayer, which is what the Stella Maris chaplains bring onto the boat. And there's some wonderful stories that they tell of how they've been supporting that mental health and that spiritual need on the boats. So it's a very worthwhile charity.
So, and among those people who go onto the ships and visit will be priests bringing Holy Communion or able to say Mass on the ship?
Well, there's many deacons who are chaplains.
Yes.
We have a chaplain aboard today, Steve Willows, and these guys are very well trained and averse to bring communion to ships, so they do that as a service. And of course there's practical things too, very practical things. So the turnaround of these ships is fast. It never used to be so fast, but it is now. So they might have 2 hours in a port or less, and to get to a dentist, to go and buy some provisions that they really need for reasons, then those things are provided as well with minibus support. So there's a practical aspect to this as well.
Yes.
Some of the guys, I was told a cute little story actually by Julian Wong, who's the chaplain for East Anglia, where we are at the moment, and he was saying that there was an Indian crew, and he asked them, "What can I do for you? You know, I'm here to help." And
that's the big question, isn't it? What do
can
you
I
need?
do? What do you
How
need?
can we help?
How do I need? And they said, "Could you take us to a park?" And he drove them to a grassy park, just an open area. They took their shoes off and they stood in the grass with their bare feet. So they're walking on steel for the whole 9 months, which is a strange thing. And the men just stood there with their eyes shut, with their bare feet, just standing on the earth, on the grass. I mean, it moves you to tears, doesn't it, to think what we're deprived of in these situations. Yes. But the other aspect of what we're doing, of course, is that we're sailing around the whole of Britain with a crew that is changing. So the crew is coming as a pilgrim.
Yes. So this is the trip that's happening now.
That's happening now.
Yes.
So this is a celebration of Stella Maris, bringing their supporters together. But the actual event itself really is I describe as a sailing pilgrimage. And I've been on pilgrimages myself, walking pilgrimages, Santiago de Compostela and that kind of thing. And I know the journey that you take. It's kind of an inward journey, although you're taking a physical journey. And sailing is an environment that really is conducive to pilgrimage, because you're out in God's creation. You're made to feel a little bit vulnerable, and God's always calling us to lean on Him and rely on faith. He wants us to rely on faith and stretch our faith. And many of the crew have never sailed or been on a small boat before, and they're intentionally making themselves vulnerable. And I kind of like that from someone who's leading it, because I know that's what the Lord wants from me, is to step out of a comfort zone and go beyond my own capacity, so that I can do things with Him, for Him, and I can lean on Him to support me. So being at sea has this wonderful experience of being in God's creation. We've passed already dolphin on the south coast and sea lions, and that'll just increase as we go to the north. We're in the season for puffins at the moment. They're in season with their silly beaks, with their clown faces. And so we'll get the joy of being in God's creation. We are part of His creation. And this pilgrim experience is really enhanced by being at sea. And I'm sure you can picture that. But what we're doing as we sail along is we're praying for the towns we pass. So this is something that is really dear to me, that prayer has power. And Mary is the patron of Stella Maris, Our Lady, Queen of the Star of the Sea. And she is interceding with us. So as we pass each town, we're conscious of their names, and we press into the coast and we pray for the people of that town, for their well-being, for their economic success, and then we'll come ashore. But we've been sailing the boat, we've been cooking, and we've been doing practical things, but really we haven't really fallen far out of prayer. So it's an intercession for others, but it's also a time of a personal journey and personal healing as we go. And we're praying, don't forget, for a renewal of our land. So this intercession is for things that we believe need prayer into the towns we pass. But ultimately, we're putting a big hug around this country, or countries, this group of islands, and it's our firm belief that this will bring about the start of another renewal at some point, a revival in our country, of a turning back to the Lord. And we're going to saturate this coastline in prayer. And another part of what we're doing is we're very conscious of the people that have been before us, that evangelised this pagan nation. And I've got on the website, sailingpilgrimages.co.uk, a whole list of all the pilgrimage routes that we pass. So as we left Southampton, we go along the old way, which is the Thomas Becket pilgrimages. It's 135 miles, goes along the coast on the southbound, swings up to Canterbury, and then we have the St Augustine walk, which is round. Then we go into the Rochester pilgrimages, we get to Gravesend. As we come up this way, we're passing St Ced's Church of St Peter's, which is Bradwell, and he sailed down under the instruction of Aidan to come and help King Sigbert to bring evangelism. So, you know, these men were on their own, and women, you know, Hilda, etc., and they formed communities which were serving people. So they preceded their good news story with an act of love, and they were helping the poor, and over time, as we know, this became a Christian nation. We need to do that again.
So you're really travelling with the saints that
Consciously
evangelised our land. And I mean, there were many young people last night who came to see you and to hear you, and your talk was so inspiring. I could see they were just perched on the edge of their seat. But you're inviting everyone you come to speak to join in prayer, so that you're the one sailing, but we're accompanying you also with our prayers, because we all want this revival. We all want to pray for the land.
Really do. Everybody wants that, and
Yes.
it's I wouldn't say it's a sense of urgency, but it's a sense that if we don't pray for this, who is?
Yes.
Right? And obviously from that prayer, it requires invitation and action.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just hoping that people will be inspired by this activity, that in the fellowship that's formed in the parishes, that they would be a parish with an open door, where they're inviting their colleagues, their work friends, people in the street to come and see, but they do that as a community, as a group, you know, not just as individuals. I'm getting a lot of lovely gifts as we come into the ports, and people have been giving us gifts of food, and at Harwich there was some parishioners that came down from Ipswich actually to join the Harwich celebration, and Adrian brought me a homemade cake that he made in the afternoon, which was absolutely delicious, and Simon, his friend, who's a farmer, had made us some sausages from his own pigs that he brought, so we were well treated there. But coming into Walsingham, Rick Jones, the deacon at Walsingham, was very kind enough to present us with something to take on the voyage. And I'm just going to show you that now, because it's something absolutely beautiful.
It must be very special, because there's only so many things you can take on board.
Well, there are, and it's small enough to be able to bring this, but isn't this wonderful? So this is a replica, really, of the statue of Our Lady that they have in the Slipper Chapel, which is at Walsingham, which is a really holy space. And this is something that we're now going to be continuing with. We do actually take in the Our Lady of the Taper in Cardigan, so I'll be taking this, I think, into the shrine in Cardigan. So I'm linking the two shrines in a very unique way, aren't I, with a sailing pilgrimage, connecting the two. So thank you very much indeed, Rick, for this wonderful statue here, which we'll look after and take on the voyage with us.
Thank you for joining us. Goodbye and God bless. The big question that is sitting awkwardly within most Catholics of England is, how do we celebrate the present English monarchy? Can we and should we celebrate it? How can we reconcile the Reformation, the king who broke from Rome and established what is now the Church of England, with the present monarchy that rules within this church? Our forefathers were martyred and canonised for opposing it. In what lies a true and honourable succession?
Daniel Cote Davies and Charles Coulombe explore the history of kingship and what true kingship really is, and even Tolkien's own interpretation of such an important and influential topic. So brace yourselves.
Charles Coulombe.
Well,
You are an esteemed historian. You are an esteemed lecturer. You've never been in trouble once in your life, not even once. You've spoken at Oxford, you've spoken at Cambridge. I would like you to today have the joyful and whimsical opportunity to lecture us on why the monarchy and Catholicism can, for want of a better word, become happy bedfellows again in this particular nation. Have you got anything to say on the matter?
oh, quite a bit. Now, mind you, I can't say it nearly as well as my learned friend, Father Aidan Nichols, in The Realm and Christendom Awake. Two wonderful books I recommend tremendously on this very topic. But I do have a good deal to say. And it is a question that comes up both in this country and in the United States. Why should Catholics care about the death of the Queen, the accession of King Charles? Isn't it just a lot of Protestant frumpery? Blah, 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 blah. And the answer is no, no, and no. The truth of the matter is twofold. One, the roots of the British monarchy are, of course, Catholic. But more than that, those, if you'll pardon the expression, desiccated remains are the last example of what Catholic monarchy was like throughout Europe, all the way to Russia, really, if you think of the Orthodox as being in this area sort of Catholic. The sad truth of the matter is that before the revolutions of the 18th and 19th century and into the 20th, monarchism and Catholicism were virtually synonymous. Now, of course, in Britain, as in Prussia and Scandinavia and so on, with the Protestant revolt, things sort of switched around. But what's important to remember is this. From the time of Constantine, the Catholic Church and the Catholic state were very like the form and the matter, as St. Thomas tells us, the matter being the state and the form being the church. To be baptized was to become a citizen. The two were coterminous. And if you were outside the church, you were outside the body politic. The Reformation comes along, and in the countries where it triumphs, you have the strange situation where the remaining Catholics are put out. And yet, those state churches, including the Church of England, and the Church of Ireland, the Church of Scotland, and so forth, continue to function in certain ways as the church had. Now, they were no longer the conscience of the king, quite the contrary, but they nevertheless did serve that particular function. And in England in particular, the Catholic forms were maintained to a degree they were not in a lot of places in Europe and the rest of Protestant Europe. Now,
could I just ask you to trace back how you understand the monarchy theologically? Because primarily, theologically, the monarchy starts with Judaism, right? And the Jewish king and all that. They will sing Zadok the priest.
Indeed.
And Nathan the prophet anointed Solomon king. And obviously what you have, if you're making a theological argument in Catholicism about the monarchy, it is going to be nested and rooted in the Jewish experience of monarchy. Could you, first of all, open that up for our audience who might not be familiar with that basis theologically in Judaism, perhaps link it to Christ, the Messiah who came within the Jewish faith, and then how, or I know it's a big question, but then how that organically develops into something that's distinctively Catholic, but obviously nested in Judaism. So if you could do that for our audience, then we could probably be able to see that whole history traced out before we try and make conclusions about now and the relevance now. Is that fair?
Easy enough, sure. Basically, as early as the book of Leviticus, God laid down what he wanted in terms of kingship for his chosen people. They wanted a king.
So it's not a pagan addition, it's something that is rooted in the God of the Jews.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The God of Israel laid down, while they were in the desert, what sort of a king he wanted. Now, when the time came that the chaotic rule of the judges drove even the Jewish people to distraction, they wanted a king, they initially did not want a king after the style already set forth. They wanted a king like the nations, and they got Saul. That didn't end very well. But when it was over, they got David and the Davidic covenant. And this is really a very, very important part of the story. Saul anoints David as king. And that anointing becomes a really, really big part of Jewish and later of Christian kingship. Now, David, of course, his dynasty was promised the rule, but not all the time and not everywhere. The heir, the rightful, legitimate heir to King David was Jesus Christ.
And that's elaborated in the genealogies that you get in the Gospels and all that.
That's why they go all through it, on both sides.
Yeah.
Both his legal genealogy from his father and his personal genealogy through his mother, bearing in mind that he didn't have a human father. So At the Last Supper, he united his Davidic kingship, to which he was heir, with the communio of the church. Of course, he did other things. He originated the sacraments, he started the priesthood, all that. But that was also the beginning of Christian kingship. And this is why in later ages, the washing of the feet on Maundy Thursday became an important part of the year in every Catholic court in Christendom.
Yes, of course.
It was because it was calling back to the foundation of Christian kingship. And from that time on, Christian kingship was seen as a participation in the kingship of Christ.
And in the Latin tradition, it comes through the word rex. I'm not actually sure what the word would be in Hebrew for king.
Malek.
Malak, okay. Now, in all of this, permit me to enjoy myself and to start talking about Tolkien, because he has a book, does he not, called The Return of the King.
Oh, yes.
And I know that you and I go back a long way in terms of our, I wouldn't say frivolity, but certainly joy in terms of trying to get Tolkien canonized as not a Roman Catholic, because we don't use that term, as a Catholic and an Englishman. Now, within that, I would like to sort of open that up for our audience by referring to The Dream of the Rood, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which is a wonderful runically inscribed poem up in Scotland, which was then translated into Old English. And in that Dream of the Rood, you have a vision of Christ as a soldier and a warrior, reinterpreting the tradition of the annihilation of your enemy, which was Germanic, and turning warriorhood into the loving of the enemy, Christianizing this Germanic impulse of warrior destiny and might, and bringing within it the divine love. Now, that is something that is absolutely at the heart of what it means to be an English Catholic. And then if you look at things like the Genesis story translated into Anglo-Saxon, you have within that statements such as, "Us is rit Mitchell that we werda wuldur kunning modem lafien," also translated as, "It is right that in our hearts we should worship the glory king of angel armies, the Wuldur Kuning." Now, you see, why I'm bringing all this in terms of Tolkien is that he was enamored by the Anglo-Saxon language. And I think a great deal of what evangelization means in England is to reawaken the roots. Because from good roots, how does Tolkien put it? I can't remember. He has a root thing, doesn't he?
Funny you should ask.
Yeah, well, how does it go? How does it go? He says something about the roots. And he said, and it's to do with Aragorn, and it's to do with the return of the king. Now, we are in the business of talking about the return of the king today. So how does Tolkien, in his characters who are kings, exemplify a vision of the sort of monarchy that we have been talking about today, rooted in this impulse in the Genesis and Dream of the Rood spirit? How does Tolkien do that?
Well, his king is at once the, how do I put it? His king, we'll take Aragorn as crowned now. His king is the chief layman in the realm, as you might say. He is the guardian of truth. He is the guardian of the weak, which was certainly very much seen to be the king's job. The king's peace is a phrase we still have today.
And we all need a chief layman.
Yeah.
Everyone needs a layman. There we are.
No, but the truth of the matter is that Aragorn really, he starts out sort of as a Bonnie Prince Charlie figure.
Right, yeah.
And then he becomes Charlemagne, the restorer of the kingdom, the remaker. Now, of course, what he remakes is not Arnor and Gondor as they were. It's rooted in them, but it's something new. It's not, because the restoration, when we use that word, you can never restore what's been smashed, but you can put some of the pieces back together.
Sure. And it's curious with him because he certainly goes on a long and winding journey of discovery to finally be anointed as the king. And I think that's interesting because it's not, in that sense, not something imposed, but it's something sort of romantically enmeshed with the narrative of life. You see, that's really where it lies, is some kind of giving a sacred dimension to the ordinary. I think that's possibly what is interwoven with Aragorn and all these figures, Gandalf, Frodo.
Well, see, and Gandalf, is very much a papal figure.
Sure.
He's the one who crowns Aragorn. But beyond that, remember when he's having his dialogue with Denethor, and they're arguing about what's needed to do in the current crisis. Denethor says, as far as I'm concerned, there is no greater good in the world today than that of Gondor.
Sure.
And Gandalf responds, the Gondor and all lands are my interest.
Oh,
Did you not, or no, I too am a steward.
Yes.
Did you not know?
Now, and you will enjoy this, Charles, I think, in terms of the etymology, because it's Denethor, and it's Theoden.
Yeah.
And so the one who throws himself suicidally, well, he's rooted in the Thor tradition. But Theoden, he has a martyrdom, which looks like suicide because he throws himself into death. But it's not the same thing.
No.
Because as it's been touched by the secret fire, at least in terms of Tolkien's cosmology, that death, that kenosis of the self, is actually rooted in this spiritual grandeur. And I think that's why some people say, at least in Peter Jackson's version of the film, that moment gives them, hairs on the end of their arms stand up, because it's so powerful to see people face death with that pagan dimension of not fearing, but it being rooted in a spiritual reason as well.
No.
So,
Theoden's
yeah.
Theoden's journey, as it were, from the puppetized weakling of Grima Wormtongue.
Needing an exorcism.
Precisely.
Needing an exorcism.
That's pulled out,
Yeah.
and then he regains his strength and he dies a hero's death.
Sure. And now I want to tie this all up, because I think exorcism is a wonderful way to talk about authority. Because in Hamlet, they can't get an exorcist, and so you have this king who's lost his power, and there's all this ambiguity, and the Denmark's glory fades, right? But when you have an exorcist, which is the gift of the apostolic tradition, then authority can be rooted in a spiritual power that liberates. I want to finish on the fact that I run a Tolkien medieval fantasy camp, Charles. I know you're aware of this. I'm bringing it from New Zealand to America to evangelize young people in America. And I just wanted to tell you about that, Charles, because it's rooted in this vision of the return of the King. I've committed my whole life to this, and I've just asked for your prayers for this particular mission to the American people. God bless you, and have a wonderful time here in Walsingham. It was so wonderful to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we are all in agreement that we will be praying for our new King.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And full versions of these interviews will be made available shortly on our social media channels.
And thank you to those who have generously supported us here at EWTN Great Britain. As you know, we are a self-funded charity. Do visit our website on ewtn.co.uk.
So until next time, goodbye and God bless.